welcome everyone who is in the room with us today for this workshop on a very interesting organizational framework that we are going to be discussing today. And we have a wonderful panel set up for you. And this workshop is actually presented by Hire Group. And before we get started, we want to show you a very short clip by Hire.
Hello, everyone. My name is William Malik, and I am the Senior Executive Director of the Innovation Management Research Center. The world is undergoing major shifts that organizations will need to make changes to sustain themselves. I'm honored to be part of a partnership between the Hire Model Research Institute and SEAC to help enterprises realize the power of Hire's Rendanheyi model. We're engaging with enterprises in Southeast Asia to transform their business operations. Come along with us and start your own transformation journey.
Nice. Thank you for sharing this. And with this, let's open up this workshop. We have our workshop moderator, Bill Fischer, who is experiencing a bit of a problem with his network at the moment. So Emanuele will actually take over at this point and start the session with us. Emanuele, may I ask you to step on the floor and get this workshop started?
Thank you so much, Christine, and very nice to see you all. We are very glad to be here. Let me thank Hire again for this opportunity. And let me introduce the topic of today and our speakers for today. So the topic is experimenting with Rendanheyi. And you will hear in a moment what Rendanheyi is if you never heard this word. But let me say already, this is probably the most amazing, the most exciting, and the most advanced, at the best of my knowledge, organizational model right now in the market. Hire is the company that in the last 35, 36 years created and experimented with the model. But today we're going to really share practice, lessons learned, real experiences that are not directly coming from Hire, that are connected to Hire, but are coming from different companies. So today, together with me, Emanuele, Quintarelli, and Simone Cicero from Boundaryless, another research center that collaborates with the Hire on the Rendanheyi, we are going to also have Rachel March. Rachel has been pioneering somewhat the same concepts, but in a very different reality that is Zappos. Rachel, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And it's 2 a.m. in Las Vegas. So double thanks, Rachel, for being with us. It's really special thanks here. And then we have Jürgen. Jürgen is connecting from Germany, and Jürgen is leading the agile transformation in Bosch. Jürgen, thanks to you as well. Oh, you're on mute.
Very good to be here, Emanuele, and thanks for having me here. I'm very excited about this workshop. Let's get started. Great.
Thank you. Thank you. I see many friends in the room. Today we are going to have an interactive session. I'm going to open it up by sharing a bit of content, just enough for getting this conversation started, to give you a few ideas about what Hire is doing, what we find exciting about the Rendanheyi, what the Rendanheyi is, and then we are going to open the floor to Rachel and to Jürgen to hear from their experience. What is happening in Zappos, what is happening in Bosch, and the connections that we can draw, but also potentially the differences among what Zappos and Bosch are doing in comparison to Hire. Then we'll leave you the space in small groups to talk to each other, to reflect a bit on 3 questions that I will share. And then we'll tell you, together with Simone, I will tell you a bit more about some tools that you can use today already to reflect about those questions in your own context, in your own organizational context, in your own company, in the specific culture that you may be living in. And finally, we'll have a panel round table, hopefully with many questions from you to touch on your interesting areas, your doubts, your ideas, your reactions in respect to what we are sharing. Together with us, we have Bill. Let me just introduce Bill. Bill is a legend. I'm sorry today we have a bit of network issues, but Bill has been working with IRE and has been writing about IRE for probably the longest time in this room, for decades. And Bill is working with us on all of this. Bill, welcome. Maybe even just for 1 second, I want to welcome you. If you can just say hi to the room. You're muted, Bill.
I'm muted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill. So let's let's get started. Oops. Okay. You're a bit of noise. Okay, let's get started. Let's get into the session, and let me share just a couple of slides about today's workshop. Let me know if you can see the screen. I hope yes. And I will ask you please to mute yourself if you're not speaking. So today we are talking about Rendanheyi. Rendanheyi is the result of a story that is more than 35 years long. And this is a story of IRE that begins in 1982 when the household appliances division, and a company selling fridges at that point was having a bit of problems. Lots of debt, most of the products were defective, and customers were dissatisfied. And let me say that this wasn't so much a problem at that point, but one guy called Zangrimin, that was a director at that point, invited all of his colleagues in the main room, and gave them hammers, brought 76 fridges in the hall, and asked them to smash the fridges to give a very strong message. The message was, if we don't destroy these refrigerators today, it's this company that is going to be shattered in the future by the market. So a strong message of an intimate connection with the market, an intimate connection with customers, and a strong appeal to infuse ownership in his colleagues. That event remained in the history and really inspired a huge chain of changes in IRE that eventually brought to the burn of what we know as IRE today in 1992, and Mr. Zangrimin as the CEO of this company. Why is this different from what we are seeing in any other organization in the world? Well, first of all, IRE went through a continuous adaptation to the market, adaptation in terms of the business model. Let me just know if you can see my screen and the slides moving. Christine, just as a confirmation.
We don't see the presentation mode, but I think you are switching slide number 4 now.
We see the refrigerator collective.
No, okay, there is some problem, so hopefully you can see it now.
Now we can see 1984
okay.
to 2019.
Yeah, okay. So as I was saying, IRE went through a number of transformations, not just one, but many transformations. Transformations impacting the business model, what they were trying to achieve in the market from a business perspective, the strategy, their role in the market, but also how the organization was functioning, culture, and the design of the organizational artifacts. You can see in this slide that from command control, they moved to a matrix organization, then reaching a point in which they inverted the pyramid. Basically, they brought the customer at the center and exposed their colleagues, employees to the customers until we reached the point of what we call today the Rendanheyi, this entrepreneurial ecosystem, more of a network than a top-down traditional siloed organization. If we had to pick up just a few concepts about the Rendanheyi, it's this idea of reducing the distance between every employee and every customer, actually making every employee responsible for the outcomes that customers are seeing. So the Rendanheyi is really driven by the customer. It's really trying to bring market dynamics within the organization, taking inspiration from also the competition in the market, the contracts between different firms, and changing the organization design based on that. It's a continuous journey. We talked about that. It's a continuous evolution. Even today, the organizational design is changing. Some of the concepts have been created just a couple of years or 1 year ago, after 35 years of experience. And the goal is really unlocking human potential. Mr. Jiang Ruimin has this idea that each colleague should be a CEO, shouldn't be told what to do, how to do it, how to get motivated, but should feel the ownership, the accountability, the energy to act and to address opportunities. And the same is true for teams. Teams shouldn't be managed, should manage themselves, should have a number of rights that we are going to discuss in a moment. If we take these 5 concepts up to a level, actually, we can say today that the Rendanheyi is really inspired by complexity theory. It is inspired by this idea of organizations as living systems. Organizations as entity can sense the market, can react to the market, and can really generate value not only for stakeholders, not only for shareholders, but also for all stakeholders, starting from employees, touching on customers, but also looking for other partners, as we are, that are collaborating with Hire. Let's get into the model. The model is a bit different from the typical organizational chart you may be used to. It really has 3 main concepts. The first concept is the micro enterprise. Hire today has something like 4,000 small teams that are, as a matter of fact, real companies. They have 3 rights: the right to decide what they want to do, their strategy, to decide direction, the right to pick the people they want to involve into their activity, so hire people, but also the right to decide how much to pay them and how to share the profit that the microenterprise is generating. The microenterprise has a distinct profit and loss. It's responsible for its expenses, it's responsible for its revenues, and it's responsible for sensing opportunities and for acting on those opportunities. So if you want, the microenterprise is really the agent of change, and it's the one that should sense the market and should reduce organizational debt, cultural debt, and technological debt. So innovation, energy, creativity is really happening within these small teams with huge levels of autonomy. But recently, Hire came up also with the need to nudge microenterprises to collaborate. Microenterprises could compete, but according to Hire, they also have to collaborate. And that's what the ecosystem micro community is. The ecosystem micro community is not a team, it's not a division, it's not a structure, it's a contract. It's a dynamic contract, an agreement between different micro enterprises to address a complex user scenario. So if instead of just producing a small part of a fridge, we want to orchestrate a complex experience in which many players can bring their part: recipes, maintenance, marketing, HR. Well, you can do that through an EMC, an ecosystem micro community. in which all the parties will negotiate their conditions, what they want to bring, what they want to have back once the results have been achieved. The third concept is platforms. IR recognizes that there are some services, shared service, that should be provided to all the micro enterprises to help them accelerate their results. It could be HR, it could be finance, it could be IT, it could be legal. Also, these teams are unbundled in small teams, in micro enterprises, and are responsible for the value for money they generate for internal customers in this case. So SSPs, shared service platforms, are again small teams providing traditional services, but in an accountable way to reduce bureaucracy, to reduce the delay that we often experience in large organizations. The last point, the last idea that IR is proposing is industry platforms. Industry platforms are a new way of doing strategy. Strategy is not done by a small group. It's done by a few directions, such as Internet of Food, that the company is investing on. So the company is putting money on the table, nudging micro enterprises and nudging EMCs to take that money and to use it to innovate and to provide value for the entire ecosystem. So also strategy gets opened up to the entire organization. It's no longer just done by the CEO or by the board. And as you can see, external enterprises, that means that this is not only for IR's employees. This is also for people beyond the boundary of the organization, as ourselves, that can collaborate with the same mechanism with IR. So let me move ahead. What we are saying is that there are three main concepts. This organization can be seen as an entrepreneurial ecosystem enabling organization. It's entrepreneurial because it wants to nudge individuals and teams to continuously sense and act on opportunities. It's ecosystemic because it wants to create mechanisms for collaboration, for co-creation, for not just having competition, but really having ways for different groups and different teams to share the value. And finally, it's enabling because even support services, the cost centers in most organizations are catalysts for value creation, are the infrastructure for their colleagues to create value. So it's an entrepreneurial ecosystem enabling organization. The interesting point to us and the point for this conversation today is that this is not happening only in IR. We are seeing the same traits, different names, different details, but the same concepts happening in small companies, in medium companies, in huge companies. Zappos is here in the picture, and maybe Bosch. We have to add Bosch in this picture as well. And this is happening in every industry. It's happening also in banking. It's happening also in pharma. It's happening in manufacturing. It's not just only happening in software or in, small organizations. So if we look at the market, if we look at the last 40 years of organizational design, well, this is happening everywhere, and we should take note and ask ourselves why, what this means. And the first outcome we are already sure about is that this is generating great value. On the left of this slide, you can see the results of IR last year. In the middle of a pandemic, IR did plus 61% in Germany, plus 52% in Italy, and became the leader in white good appliances. And there are thousands and thousands of big organizations studying them and trying to make sense of what they're doing. And we are helping with it. So we are helping organizations in this journey. What they're doing is increasing business performance, helping innovation, helping employee engagement, helping sustainability, exceeding the market results, basically from every perspective. Sorry. Let me close this presentation. What we are saying is that IR and the Rendanheyi are the example of a new way of organizing. Not a different organization, but a different idea of how teams, units, customers, employees can come together. And using the words of Days Norton, one of the leaders in complexity, what we are seeing with Hire is that we can find contextually unique solutions that can emerge from the organization, not be imposed from the management or the leaders, so not from the top, but from the organization, to address the needs of customers, the needs of employees, but maintaining a messy coherence. So we are going beyond traditional coherence, and we are trying to distribute coordination in the firm without using hierarchy. This is the big news. And closing this presentation with just a sentence from Mr. Jiang Zemin, we could say that every empire will eventually collapse. If we look at the team, only at the team or at the individual, well, the team may not succeed, may not achieve its goals. But the rainforest, this complex ecosystem of connections, on the other hand, can be sustained. Hire is really about fostering ecosystems, fostering platforms, creating the energy and the mechanisms for many parts to dynamically come together and create amazing value for itself and for the market. So let me stop here. This is what we wanted to share just as an ice breaker for our conversation. And at this point, I would like to leave the floor to Rachel and to Jochen to see two examples, different companies, different cultures, different continents even, but with some interesting connections to what I just said. So keep in mind these concepts and listen to Jochen and Rachel to see if there is some resonance.
Emanuele, do you want to introduce the three topics first? Because I think the guests will be responding.
Yeah, sure. Right. So let me introduce three lenses that we would like to use here. So three lenses are, and you may see them also in the words of Rachel and Jochen. The first one is how can you use some of these ideas to reconfigure the organizational design, to rethink the way the organization is decomposed in multiple units. And you have seen micro enterprises, and you have seen EMCs, and you have seen contracts, and you have seen platforms. This is how Hire does it. But the idea is how is organizational design going to look like if we want to be more adaptive, customer focused, better able to engage employees. The second point is in this new design, what's the level of autonomy that the new units are going to have? In Hire, you can pick strategy, you can hire people, you can decide how much to pay them. You have a distinct profit and loss. And finally, what's the role of technology? Something I didn't touch a lot upon is that Hire is doing this. It's creating these contracts through blockchain and smart contracts. So technology, not just the paper, is the enabler for many teams to dynamically come together, negotiate, sign agreements, and distribute the value that they are going to generate. These are the three issues, the three areas that we are going then to address in the breakouts, and that we have asked also Rachel and Jochen to address in their considerations. So let me stop here and pass the ball to Rachel and to Jochen. Just one sec. Let me stop presenting. Okay. Rachel, Jochen, up to you.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you so much for that. Hi, everyone.
Who wants to start? Rachel.
I don't mind starting. So just a quick intro. I spent 10 years with Zappos. For the past year, I've been out on my own working with other organizations. But prior to that, I spent the the last 4 years of my time at Zappos helping build an organization that can stand the test of time. So that's really what we were trying to do. And in doing that, we leveraged the advantage of markets. So markets are the most, resilient, responsive way of organizing your business. And so just a few, context setting for what we did at Zappos is, and actually this, I want to start by addressing one of the comments related to the transition. Like, where do you start? So with a traditional organization, it's like, okay, how do we do this? And does this apply? And could it apply to other organizations? And what we did was basically start with the existing teams. And we introduced the idea of each team operating like an independent micro business within the organization. So it didn't require a complete reorganization. It didn't require a lot of change in the early stages. It just required each team to define who is your customer and what value do you deliver to the customer. We also redefined customer, which also was brought up in the comments. Customer traditionally is defined as an external customer. We redefine that by calling every internal team a customer. That way, we started introducing this concept of doing business with internal and external customers. And to the technology point, every team actually had their own P&L. So every single team operated like an independent business where they identified the value that they were delivering and entered into service agreements with any other internal team. So you can take even HR as an example, or IT as an example. There was a minimum level of service provided internally, and you would have to pay for that service internally. And also teams that were able to basically kind of pass some compliance related requirements were able to offer their services externally. So every team had the opportunity of not only providing their services internally, such as they do in an traditional organization, but also the opportunity to sell those services external and increase the external revenue coming into the company as a whole. Jochen, did you want to introduce a little bit about your case?
Yeah, perfect. Oh, there's an echo. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel, for giving me the opportunity of handing it over. Yes, my name is Jochen, as Emanuele already said. Actually, I'm working for Bosch, but the division I'm working for is called Bosch Power Tools. So Bosch overall is a well-known brand, not only in Germany, but globally, working 400,000 people for us. And I'm part of the Power Tools division. We're making really the cool tools that you need to use when you want to do a DIY project or building your new house. We are 20,000 people within the big Bosch group, and we used to be organized in 6 business units. And within these 6 business units, we were organized in a classical functional organization, together with cross-functional projects where people were assigned to develop our new products that were very centric to the user. And I think what we started actually 5 years ago, that we not only challenge the status quo in terms of how we organize and work together, but that we also challenge the status quo on how to run such a transformation. So I'm leading, I always say, a small but high quality project team, we don't have the master plan at the beginning. We didn't have the blueprint at the beginning, but we really invited the associates to collaborate and co-create with us on what our new organization should look like. But I think there were a couple of principles, as we called them, that you might find also in the Rendanheyi model that you saw. But I think it's similar to what we say when you look at an organization. We really wanted to have permanent cross-functional teams. So that was one of the principles we really wanted to establish, because we saw many different excuses of people going into projects, working from a marketing background and complaining then back in their home department about how engineers just don't get it what the market wants, or the other way around, how engineers just freaking out about marketing slides and don't see the real realization there. So I think there we really restructured, similar to what Rachel mentioned. We have now 50 plus business teams in our Power Tools division that are end-to-end responsible with a cross-functional background from marketing, engineering, purchasing, quality, you name it. We still have our 6 business units because they really address different user needs or totally different product categories. And I think that's something which we really established. When it comes to the second point about this autonomy question, I think bringing in these new business teams with a P&L and innovation focus, but also with we call it also internally like a from cradle to grave concept, that you're not only responsible in terms of numbers, but also responsible in bringing out new innovations, also letting go of products that you're currently running, is totally in the business teams. But we have also in the business units actually expertise teams, as we call them. They are functionally organized, and their purely purpose is to really serve those business teams to make them more successful. And they usually focus, when it comes to autonomy, on those things which are really relevant for the majority or greater number of business teams. So concerning coloring of our tools, concerning branding with one visual brand, but also looking in our motors or softwares where we really want to have also efficiency gains, and not every business team reinventing the wheel. The third part with technology, I think we see on the one hand a huge shift in our power tools, where you see a lot more technology inside our tools, and where we just need this cross-functional collaboration to come out with the best solutions. But I would also bring in a different twist when it comes to technology, where we really see the need for cultural change in our company, to not be kind of sitting in your safe environment, in your own department, but really bringing a cultural change to have less hierarchy and more involvement of people. And I think that's something which I really driving since 4 or 5 years, and it's just a very, very exciting time of this. So I see, Rachel, we have some connection and some totally different background.
Absolutely. And, I wanted to introduce another, I would say the minimum, we introduced this triangle of accountability to make sure that every team had as much autonomy as possible. So introducing minimal constraint to enable maximum freedom is how we like to say it. There's a really pretty triangle. I don't have it for you to take a look at, but really those 3 constraints include all teams have to provide the very best customer service and customer experience. So that helps it keep in line, with the Zappos core values and mission is to deliver wow through service. The second constraint is really just to live the core values. So it can't be something that's not, in line with the brand and the culture. And the third one is that every team had to at least balance their P&L. That's a little bit of a tricky one because of the fact that we introduced this concept of P&L, but also this people costs. And there was a formula that allowed teams to basically, it required them to cover their shared services. So it's similar, a little bit similar to the hire model, where we did have shared services. So we have IT and HR and legal and things like that. But it only covered the minimum, basic functions that were absolutely required for teams to use internally. You could have the, opportunity to go externally or, get services if you need something really quick and expedited. You could actually hire some of those services outside of the organization. So there was some flexibility in that. And what that also did was introduce the market dynamics. So this whole initiative is called market-based dynamics. We shortened it MBD. So if you've seen anything about Zappos and MBD, that's what I'm talking about. But basically with these market dynamics, it required all of these teams to compete to a degree with the external market. So their pricing, their service agreements between teams couldn't just be, out of this world expensive, because teams had the autonomy and opportunity to, get those services outside of the organizational walls. We were also very lucky to have a lot of support in building the technology needed to enable this system. We built an internal tool called the Circle Financial Overview tool. Excuse me. And what that did is made all of the financials very visible across teams. So I could actually see that Emanuele's team had extra money but that they didn't spend. It was sitting in their bank account. And I might say, hey, we're introducing this thing, or we want to explore or test and innovate in a specific way. Would you be interested in investing? So we actually had cross-team investing to help create a culture of innovation within the organization, which was, in my opinion, one of the most exciting things, because a lot of times you have to go up the ladder to get money. And there's big buckets of money within these, upper rungs of this hierarchy. And we created a much more networked budgeting system that we called customer generated budgeting. So actually every single team got their money from other teams through the service agreement, and all of that was very visible. We also were tracking progress based on what we called internal KPIs or MBD KPIs. So we were looking at things such as how much external revenue is each team bringing in, how many connections across the organization. So that helped us understand, what this network looked like and really how strong were those bonds within the organization across teams. And then also how much revenue was coming from outside of your parent circle or team. So we introduced Holacracy in 2013. This came in 2017. So there's still some reference to circles. But basically, we wanted to see if teams could diversify and create a more stable revenue stream by not having all of their money come from just one external customer or one internal customer. We really wanted them to have more than one, was essentially the goal.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, Rachel, that's also a very, very progressive approach. I have to admit, concerning the this internal competition and also be allowed to go outside via this autonomy, I think we are not there yet. What we challenged a lot with and I think I get that question a lot, is how did you set up, being organized in functional before and now in cross-functional, but still having functional expertise roles. How did you do that? I think what we did, we were coming from a functional organization where the functions had the strongest power in terms of also making business decision at the end, right? To bring in this new breed of business teams, and we developed or set up those business teams. I think there are two ways to do that. The first way would be to go to the functional departments and say, we have this great idea with cross-functional teams. How many people can you let go, and which one of those would that be? I think that's one goal, to go there. Where you might find that it's way too less people and probably not the right ones. And we did actually the opposite way, to say, what, we will set up cross-functional business teams, and as a default, everybody going into the cross-functional business teams. And you, as service functions, as functional expertises, you actually need to justify a certain percentage to get out of those business teams' responsibility again. So it's kind of a same results or same going in position, but with very different outcomes, because now we have the majority of our people in the business teams, where they are much more closer to, on the one hand side, on the users. But I also want to emphasize that these cross-functional business teams not only are focusing on the indirect workers sitting somewhere in the headquarters, but building power tools is really something, and I'm very happy to say that it's something you can have in your hands, right? So we also broke up this thinking, this old way thinking, down to the plant level. So we have in our plants, which are spread around the globe, we also have people that are working on the assembly line, blue-collar workers who are now target line reporting to these business teams, which brings the business teams from the indirect workers much more closer to the problems that plants facing, and not just shouting and say, why is it not coming? But also have much more identification of the people at the plants with, I'm developing grinding products for the market in the US. So I think that's speaking about this cultural shift that we also want to initialize. And saying how much autonomy and how much alignment? I think that's always a tricky question to answer. There's no all in one way or one way all in the other way, I would say. And also, but I would really challenge to say it creates a new dynamic, and it creates a dynamic around the right questions, because at the end we started the journey of our, what we called at that time, agile transformation, about how can we as a consumer goods division in Bosch become more user-centric, and with user-centric really use not consumer, customer, but really user, the people who use our tools. And these were not the people we had always in mind, let's put it that way, at the 10, 15 years ago, because we sell and still selling a lot via our retail partners, but really having this direct interaction with the users to bring them closer to the market dynamics. I think it's always a balancing out, autonomy, alignment, but I think at the end of the day, shifting it more to autonomy helps us to bring more the user into the focus. Yeah.
You're on mute,
Emanuele, you're on mute.
Oh, apologies. Thank you so much, Rachel and Jürgen. I think Zappos and Bosch are great stories. Online, I sent you a link. There is an interview with Rachel if you want to hear more. And we are going to publish another interview with Jürgen. Definitely there are connections in terms of distance from customers, in terms of horizontal organization, in terms of exposing services, in terms of profit, distributed profit and loss. I have seen many questions in the chat in terms of engagement, and we are going to touch on some of them. I will just leave the word to Bill. Bill, if you can hear us and talk, I will leave you a couple of minutes for your comments. Bill?
Okay, I'm not sure if Bill has a connection at the moment.
Okay, doesn't work. So let's move into a quick poll. So I'm going to ask you to address a few questions, actually a few options. I will show the three options again that you have seen in my slide. Let me share the screen again. So these are.
So the poll questions.
Okay,
great. Right now.
Great.
And we see the first responses also coming in. So if I see correctly, Emanuele, it's about the 3 pillars that you mentioned before.
Please go ahead and vote. So if you are considering a major, radical, extreme transformation in your organization, well, and you could bet on something, what would you bet on? Reconfiguration of your organizational units, this idea of platforms, this idea of flattening your organization, giving power to people, really thinking about the autonomy you will grant to new units or technology.
So we can see the responses coming in. 60% voted already, but there's still room for improvement. Feel free to go through the questions and leave your vote. Great.
We're asking for the most challenging, and yes, of course, there are some more. Changing consciousness of the leadership that could be important as well.
It's hard to choose from these 3, right?
Few more seconds if you want to just pick some. At this time, number 2, establishing what level of autonomy will be granted is leading, but reconfiguration is trying to catch it. So, okay. I think we are good.
I think we can end the poll and show the results right now, and we have it here on the screen.
Thank you so much, Christine. Yes, so your first option is establishing what level of autonomy will be granted to these new units. And maybe let me reflect briefly on this. I've seen many comments in the chat talking about agile and talking about what we have been discussing today. And of course, Jürgen has a great experience with agile. My personal feeling, if I could react to this, is that yes, agile could be the starting point, but we are definitely going beyond that, and even beyond business agility. I've seen business agility in the chat. We are really talking about a new idea of organization, a new idea of alignment, a new idea of ownership, a new idea of strategy. Agile can open the door to this. In my experience, if we stay at the Scrum level, let's say it's not enough. With this, actually, I will leave the space to you. We're going to split in small teams and discuss a bit about what you heard from me, from Rachel, from Jochen. If it resonates with you, if it doesn't, please discuss with your small group. And we are going back in something like 20 minutes to share with the bigger room.
Exactly. Thank you, Emanuele, for introducing the breakout rooms that we're about to have. So most of you probably know the drill. You will receive an invitation to a breakout room. You will be a small group of people discussing exactly what Emanuele just introduced. Feel free to let the person with the longest hair start and join the breakout room once you receive the pop-up, and you will be brought back in 20 minutes. Okay, so you should have your invitation on the screen. And we can see people moving already. Good. If you seem to have an issue, don't see a pop-up, please let us know. Okay, great. If somebody is still here with us who would like to join a breakout room, please let us know either in the chat or verbally so we can manually move you as well. Great. Bill, can you hear us? Let's do a quick check-in if you can hear us.
Bill can hear us. I was in touch with him, trying to get him into the conversation. I see Bill is connected with two. For now, no more, Bill. You're no more connected with the phone. Maybe your phone connection fell, so I don't know why. But
okay.
He was connected with the phone and he couldn't. Yeah. I think he couldn't join. Okay, yes, it's in room 5 now with the phone. So maybe if you can bring him back into the big room.
Okay, that's great. Yeah,
I'll do that. I'll do that if you don't mind, because I'm co-hosting. So now Bill is in the big room with both the connections, but he tried to unmute himself on the phone connection and he couldn't. So maybe the somebody from the IT actually, or someone actually muted him. So maybe we can try to see as soon as Bill comes back if he can unmute himself on the
Yeah, let's see when he comes back. I just wanted to see if there's a chance that he regained his connection.
Yeah, because he will gladly moderate the panel, and I think it should work. So let's wait for Bill to come back and see.
Wonderful, great.
Okay, Simone, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you, Bill. Welcome back.
Well, thanks. This has been very frustrating. Is it stable?
It seems to be a very stable connection now. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So so I'll jump in after this.
Yes, you can.
After we start the panel.
Exactly. So I would say we have like 15 more minutes of a breakout session right now. Once
Right.
participants come back, you are free to jump in and take over the moderation. We will probably harvest some voices from the participants after the breakouts, and then you take over for the panel, right?
Okay. Okay. So Simone, anything that you want me to do that fits with what your plans are?
Well, not really. I think anything that helps you with the moderation, it's I guess it can be helpful.
Shall we move you into a breakout room so you can discuss this in private, because there's also other people in this room?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay, yes, that's good.
We will set this up. We will put you in a separate room, yes?
Thanks, Christina.
Yes.
I'm afraid I cannot open an additional breakout room while a breakout room session is going on.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
We can do this by WhatsApp.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, let me go get my phone.
Bill, if you can hear me. I just want to let you know that the breakout rooms will close in a minute.
Hi, Christine. Could you send me the Google Doc again?
I'll send it to you again, and people will be back in like a minute or so, just so you know, yes?
Okay, yes.
Great.
Got it.
Perfect.
Okay, I do have it. So do we have the ability to show hands?
Of course, yes. Participants can also show hands.
Okay.
And we already have some questions collected from before in the document. You can see it.
Okay, I have like 2 questions on the, 4 questions, 5 questions. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yep, okay.
Great. Okay, I see people are coming back now. Welcome back to the main room. Welcome back after your breakout sessions, everyone. I hope you had some lively discussions. Time's always too short in the breakouts. Maybe you want to share with us in the chat what your experience was. Share with us a little what you discussed. And in the meantime, I'm actually handing over to Bill Fischer, who will guide us through the rest of the session. We're very happy to have him. And Bill, with this, can I hand the word to you?
Well, you know, I'm thinking that maybe I did this too soon. Can you hand it over to Emanuele again or Simone?
We can hear you.
Another minute, no worries. All right, let's have a look in the chat in the meantime, because we're really curious about your insights from the breakout sessions that you just did. So you were a small group of people, of 3-4 people in each room, discussing exactly what we talked about before with the 3 pillars, and we are interested to hear your experience in these breakout sessions. So I can see Mike shared, as usual, at Drucker, a wonderful group with diverse ideas and experiences. Great. Shannon says, lovely conversation and connection between ideas. Nice. Nayara agrees with Shannon. Wonderful. Okay. Very interesting, says Mark. Great. Nice to see that you also had some nice discussions. Feel free to keep sharing in the chat so we all get a bit of a feeling of what's going on. So Ashutosh says, we had a great conversation with Rachel. Wonderful. Great to hear that. Okay. So there's also some more questions coming in, and we will make sure to include some of them in the remaining time that we have in the session, as Bill will take over in just a minute to continue this workshop, this panel, and he will also make sure to include some of your questions. So feel free to send them in. We'll do our best to include most of them. Good. We also see just a couple more comments from the chat. Rajat says, we did self-moderation, perfect. Joseph says, nice exchange about where to start. Yes, that's always the hardest step. Multicultural, says Raphael, USA, Australia, Italy, Vienna, China, and Peru. Wow, what a breakout room. It was great to have Jochen with us and seeing diversity in the room, says Astrid. Thank you so much for sharing all. Bill, what is the status?
So can you hear me?
We can hear you loud
I
and
have to
clear.
apologize, first of all, to everybody for a complete breakdown of my system. Catastrophic would be an understatement. But I've been following you avidly, and I think that this is really great. Is there anyone, would anyone have a show of hands that just wanted to tell us quickly something about what their conversation was regarding the last breakout, the impediments? Okay.
So we have Ashutosh, for example, who's raising his hand.
Yes.
Well, great to see you in person. We had met in 2015 at the Drucker conference in Vienna. So great to see you again in person.
What's left of me. Thank you.
Great. So I think we had a great conversation with Rachel, and one of the things we did discuss was about how providing greater autonomy to internal teams could in fact end up cannibalizing some revenue streams, especially if they're allowed to kind of go outside and market their service. Sometimes you don't often enough tap into it inside the organization as much as it's leveraged outside. So that was an interesting topic and thread that was discussed. So of course, Rachel said that's a possibility, and of course it depends on the organizational culture. So it would be great to know your comments as well if you had any, Bill.
So we'll do that at the panel, but that's a really great comment. Thank you so much for that. Dale, you have your hand up.
Yes, our discussion revolved around how do you get traditional top-down command and control organization to adopt this kind of organizational change where you're empowering the entire organizations to do things differently. Unless you've got commitment from the top, like Hire had, they were about to go to bankruptcy and they had to do this. Unless you have a burning bridge kind of going over the precipice, how do you get this kind of change into organizations that think they're doing okay and don't see the immediate need to make this kind of change?
That's a really great question. And I think I share your concerns about that. That comes up almost all the time. Is that a St. Lawrence pennant behind you?
That sure is.
Dale, I went to Clarkson. We have to talk offline.
Oh yeah, that's it.
But the whole issue of top down versus bottom up and how you make this move, particularly when the bottom is frustrated with what's going on and the top doesn't seem to get the message. Great question. Right. We're gonna make a transition at this point, and I'm going to ask Simone, Cicero, and Emanuele to come back and add a little bit of precision to the conversation. I think one of the things that we need is a better vocabulary for addressing this and frameworks for thinking about it. And I think that their work, not only with Hire on Rendanheyi, but some of the other organizations they're working with, gives them an opportunity to begin thinking about what that vocabulary might be and what the frameworks could be that would be useful. So are you guys ready?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in quickly just to justify my contribution for today. Essentially, I've been sitting in the background here, and for those of you that are not familiar with me, I'm the CEO of Boundaryless, this company that is collaborating with Hire in developing these new frameworks and with other companies. But essentially, the point to echo the point that Bill was talking about, I think this idea of the vocabulary is really important. So what we are seeing emerging is definitely the emergence of so-called, how we call it, this common protocol of organizing. So we're seeing, to some extent, something like common ways of organizing that essentially depend on the fact that the situation that all companies are facing are increasingly complex, are increasingly volatile. And so it seems like also the reduction of transaction costs that we are witnessing with the penetration of these digital technologies and new ways of collaborating are really calling for some standardization. And why we see this standardization, we assume that we are seeing that as a result, let's say, of organizations trying to mimic and try to resonate with what is happening outside of their internal organization systems. So on the market, for example, we are seeing a very strong emergence of micro-entrepreneurial patterns. We're seeing small teams, small companies being increasingly more capable to have large impacts. And therefore, I think we are seeing these happening inside organizations also as a way to, let's say, reduce the differences between the outside and the inside. Also, a point that is emerging is as you try to reconfigure your organization for flow, you may want to really let's say, in an economy that is made of APIs and connecting pieces together, you don't want to really structure too much internally. You want to keep your organization as much as possible as a swarming organization that can really connect with the inside and the outside And this essentially means you need to reduce the size of the units in your organization. You need to make them much more, let's say, entrepreneurial, independent, and self-organized. Of course, there are thousands of ways to do that. Some go more into the P&L, profit and loss adoption at the unit level. Some other companies are using different so-called forcing functions. So, for example, what we are seeing in companies such as Amazon is really different from what Hire is doing, but to some extent has the same principles. So it's still small teams, it's still about teams optimizing to, let's say, deliver a certain KPI. In the case of Hire, is P&L. In the case of Amazon, it's a more complex process of setting up KPIs and, let's say, and objectives for small teams. But still, the idea is to really make small elements, small units able to focus on what they can deliver and be supported internally from what we call, and increasingly many companies call, shared services, shared platforms. So this is what we are seeing, and this is, as I would say, very promising, especially if you look into inter-organizational collaboration. So we may be seeing actually an age of, let's say, disappearing boundaries between companies. This is at least how it feels from the inside. So that's something that I wanted to share, Bill, in reflection with your call towards vocabulary and shared grammars for organizing.
Okay, so thanks, Simone. This might be a good place for you and Emanuele to talk about the work you have been doing with Hire, with the 3EO framework, and how that discusses the challenges we've spoken about.
Yeah, happy to jump on that, and thanks, Simone, for your comments. I will be very brief. Our goal is twofold as Boundaryless. On one side, we would like to let everybody know about what is happening in the market. Hire is a great example. There are many details raised in your questions that we didn't discuss today. And the Rendanheyi is made by details. Actually, it's not a model, as they would say. There is no model. It's a continuous experimentation learning. So the details are important. The process of experimentation is important. That's why we are also interested in helping organizations to try it. Not necessarily with us. We really believe in open source, and we really believe in providing a framework that you can use for free if you want to play with all of these. And that's what I'm going to share very briefly. What you see on my screen, it's called the EEO toolkit. The EEO, as you know, stands for Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Enabling Organization. It's an open source tool. You can connect with us, and maybe Simone can post the link in the chat. You can download it for free. And it's really made based on our experience with Hire, but also experience directly with big corporations going through this journey to play with the concepts of micro enterprises, of enterprise micro communities, with platforms at your own speed and based on your own organizational context. It's made of 5 canvases that really help you to take all different levels of this big challenge. It's clear that this is a big challenge. It's not easy to go from a traditional top-down hierarchical command control organization to what Hire or to what Zappos or to what Bosch are trying to do. The first point is the ecosystem enabling culture canvas. It's really about thinking about the big differences, the big cultural differences, the different scales of the organization, the entrepreneur, a key concept for Hire, the micro enterprise, and the old organization, and trying to discuss how some basic functions of organizational design can be addressed. The EEO map is a bit more precise. It's not just looking at these 3 functions, but also at the processes of the organization. How do you do strategy? How do you do execution? How do you do performance in this new world? What are your contextual solutions to that? The micro unit canvas is about designing, thinking, envisioning new micro enterprises in terms of their connection to users, to customers, the assets they're going to use, how they're going to scale, the services they're going to get from other people and other teams, as Rachel was describing in the organization. The enterprise micro community canvas is about these agreements, multi-party emergent agreements between micro enterprises, internal and external, but also between the micro enterprises and the shared services platforms and industry platforms. So it's here where complexity starts to emerge. And finally, the organizational experiment canvas, it's a way to crowdsource ideas for new micro enterprises. And this is often the starting point. Where do you start? In which part of your business, of your organizational structure, you would like to try to create entrepreneurial autonomous units? So this is one point to start. I will only give you one example about how these canvases could be used to address two of the three questions we discussed today. If we want to think about reconfiguring organizational units, so unbundling hierarchical top-down firms through the EMC and the ME canvases, you can use them to ask yourself, how can we prevent units from just fighting each other? We want them to compete. This is what it's happening in hire, but we want them to collaborate. It's a paradox. How can we do that? The EMC canvas, it's the place in which, also the ME canvas, it's the place in which you can think about these agreements, these exchanges, these interfaces between the teams. How can we reduce the cost for creating new collaborations? Rachel was talking about having these circles to expose a list of services. That's how you can minimize the cost for establishing collaboration. Performance is another area that you can draft in these canvases to align the teams. Somebody was commenting in the chat, okay, but how can we avoid mass chaos? Well, performance is not the only way, but a way to do this. What are the supporting services, HR, legal, IT, compliance that you need, how the strategy happens? All of these can be more than discussed, experimented by playing with the canvases. The second level is the EO map, and this is more the systemic thinking about the evolution that you can have. So with this, you can say, who is going to get in charge for exploring new opportunities? Is it really the top management, or is it everybody? And what are the individual units responsible for? Can they hire people? Can they decide how to pay them? Can they decide how to reach decisions? Can they decide how to distribute the value that they generate? Can they decide the list of services, or somebody is deciding for them? Can you do this, all of this with external entities, or only with the employees? These canvases basically are a way to nudge this evolution. And with nudging, I mean not doing another top-down design, thinking about a target already model. It's about experimentation. It's about complexity. It's about emergence. It's about deciding the enabling constraints, the minimum viable constraints, giving the organization coherence, messy coherence though, instead of telling everybody what to do. So the canvases are the support for this experimentation, this emergence, but also the minimum amount of coherence, what we call the architecting phase, that will guarantee the company to be a company, the organization to be an organization. So reach out to us. Of course, we are teaching this, we are helping organizations with this. We are just launching next week a self-paced masterclass to play with this, not just to listen to this, because we want organization to take ownership, to experiment, and to try to apply all of these in their unique way, not to be told what to do by us or by consultants. So again, let me stop here. I've tried to be brief, but our goal is to open source the Rendanheyi, not to teach you only the Rendanheyi, to teach you what you need to apply it, to take ownership and apply it in your own organization with your own answer. This is what we believe, contextual solutions, not a ready-made solution for everybody. Bill.
Thanks, Emanuele. I want to just say that in the work that I've been doing, I find that just getting people to play with those canvases changes the dynamic. So we go from aspirations to trade-offs. And so for me, it introduces an analytical dimension into the conversations that I think has been lacking. So I'm really glad you spoke about that. What I'd like to do now, we have a whole bunch of questions that have come up and more coming in, I hope. And what I'd like to do is get the panel together and, ask and put these questions out to the whole panel and see how your experiences jive, complement, or contrast with one another. So let me start by talking about the question that came up right at the end of the conversation that Christine launched, and that was the question regarding top management. How do you get and now I'm looking at Rachel and Jochen, as well as Simone and Emanuele. How do you what's your experiences with getting top management to buy in? Or is this all dependent upon a visionary leader who he or she sees, gets the message and knows what to do and launches this whole thing? Can it be done any other way? Rachel, you're smiling. That's a good sign.
Yes, I'm smiling because I've experienced it both ways. So at Zappos, if you're familiar at all with the visionary leader, the late Tony Hsieh, I worked very closely with him, and he definitely kind of released all of the constraints that he wanted to, when and where. The actual problem was more with the layers below that middle management layer, where they felt like their loss of control, and they didn't know their place anymore. But a lot of that happened actually with the holacracy transition, moving to more self-managed teams. With the introduction of market-based dynamics, it was a little bit easier because of the fact that if you're in any traditional organization, not everyone is an entrepreneur. Not everybody wants to be a CEO of their own team, and that was okay. But it created more space for those leaders who wanted to manage budget and things like that, that come with a more traditional organizations. That being said, in the past year, I'm working with a lot of other organizations that may or may not have that visionary leader. But there definitely has to be some place, some person within the organization, whether it's at the very top or a lower level, to start to introduce and provide the opportunity for change. It doesn't have to be organization-wide to begin with. You can start with, for example, the IT organization. I work with a lot of IT organizations, and the CIO is interested in doing things differently. You can start there. What starts to happen is the rest of the organization is like, what are you doing? And we want to see some of that, some of those advantages.
Oh, Bill, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Bill. Sorry.
You would think I've been on mute all morning. You would think I'd be able to figure out how to get off. What about Jochen? What's been your experience with top management, particularly in an organization that's been as traditionally hierarchical as Bosch?
I think there's different things that I would like to add. I think I mean, working for one division of Bosch, I have to say that the advantage of working for a corporation that has many different divisions, you know, automotive, consumer goods, power tools, is that the division itself has a lot of freedom on how to react to serve the market needs. So I think that helps, but then you're still speaking about a big division of 20,000 people. I think the best is a combination of bottom interest or some rebels around in the company who say we need to do things differently. It doesn't need to be the biggest group, but it needs to be a group that is seen by leaders and they are given the freedom to do things differently. It can be a very small group, it can be a pilot, a lighthouse, whatever you want to call it. And if you make them successful, or if they become successful in new ways of doing things, then it's really interesting to see if you have good leadership that they really get the appetite very quickly. And I think that might be something which I would always not try to convince the whole organization before you start something. Start with a very small team that gets the freedom. And if they get successful, you will be surprised how this mouth to mouth in an organization like this is actually gaining traction. And then the strong leadership support is really important once you really want to scale it. I told you we have 6 business units. I think you cannot start in each business unit to say, let's start with a small project in your business unit. I think we had a very, very humble leaders also to say, no, we need to look at each business unit now holistically and really do it. But I think this allowing to start small and scale big is, I think, an important layer, not to try to do everything with one shot.
But you didn't start with the smallest one within your business units, did you?
No, we did not. We did not. I think we had a couple of projects which were across business units where we said, okay, let's try it out. The results were promising. They were not so much, it was not so hard to do because it was a smaller team, but still with very important products. But then we really looked in our business units, not to say we now found a golden nugget and do it for every business unit the same way. We said we start with one, which was a really important one for us, and learn from that before the others jump on different boats, right? Or on the same sail. And I think that's something that is really important, to not try to reinvent the wheel all at once when you have a big company running already, but really trying to give enough freedom to the people and invite them to co-create with you, and then really make it as quick as possible, but not rushing into solving every problem with one shot.
Okay, thank you. Simone,
I'd like to add, can I add to that for a second?
Sure.
I just want to say that, I agree with you, and you absolutely can start small. You don't have to tackle the whole organization at the same time. However, what we found was the real unlock came from changing the way teams got their budget. We actually threw the term budget out the window. We then called it revenue. So it was, how do teams get their revenue? And so introducing a new, budgeting or, way teams get funded was a game changer for us, because it allowed teams who wanted to just do the same thing in the same way as they always have been to be able to do that. But it also unlocked the opportunity for all teams to do it slightly different. And so it just, I have to say that just that one change, it didn't necessarily have to change the whole organization, but it absolutely was the catalyst for teams to think differently, because they all of a sudden had fewer constraints.
Okay,
Bill, maybe if I can jump in, sorry. Something we didn't stress enough is you don't have to do this. You have to do this if you have a reason for doing it. So the strategic question of why you want to take inspiration from Haier, from Zappos, from Bosch, from Morningstar, from many others is crucial. And this story is, that's why we wanted to have this workshop today, to give you examples, to give your leadership examples, not because you can copy them, but because you can ask yourself questions about how is this playing into my own strategy, my own industry, my own countries, and whatever. If you address this question, so at the end, if you understand it, you want to be more innovative, you want to distribute, creativity, you want to give accountability, you want engagement, you want to act as a platform in the market, so enable thousands of others to go create value with you. Well, these stories could be inspiration And then I agree with what Rachel and Jürgen said. It's not a big bang transformation in my experience. It's not a transformation only at the team level. It's about creating the conditions for pilots, experiments to pop up, but also to be tied together and to have impact. If you have 100,000 people, well, piloting is great. This is what we do. But then eventually you may want to achieve impact at the enterprise-wide scale. Those are the two basic needs, but it depends on your readiness. If your top management is against this, well, it's a bit longer. It's still possible though.
Could Simone, do you have anything to add at this point?
I mean, I don't want to take much time because it's much important to have practitioners here. But from what I see, I think one key thing that is emerging is some companies are more open to so-called creative entropy. So the more you are open to the company going in new directions that are not necessarily the business that you already run, the more we see the P&L choices, the more we see essentially, the idea that you have to run your own budget, to make it possible for you to exist as a unit inside the organization. While if you have organizations that are much more about, optimizing the inner elements, let's say, to deliver certain complex customer value proposition, and then, you need to have this way to cascade down your output metrics that are maybe clear at the organizational level into the input metrics for all the small units that you have inside your organization. And this is, for example, where, as I said, companies like Amazon have this complex planning and KPI process that runs twice a year and that is based on divisions having certain output metrics, and then cascading down these metrics into the small teams. Instead, what Russia was making clear is that budgeting and the way that you essentially make sustainable your unit through these complexity-friendly ways that she was looking into, like managing your P&L, pricing your services. This is something that we are seeing, especially in companies that are really open to see new spaces, new directions, a bit less strategic. How Hire is doing that? I think it's interesting. It's essentially ensuring coherence through an investment policy. So this is another thing that is really, really important and interesting in Hire. You kind of have an organization that is really open to creative entropy. And on the other hand, you have this kind of venture builder approach where you have investors treating their employees more like investees than anything else. And I think this is really, really future proof and much more complexity ready than complex KPI enforcement and cascading through the organization that we see in even very, very competitive and great organizations like Amazon. So I think this is a question that we need to take into account. P&L, profit and loss, pricing, these things are really, really great at collapsing complexity into clear signals.
So there was a question that came up just a few minutes ago about, or a comment about how ecosystems, when you think about ecosystems and the organizations within them, it's useful to think of them as fractals, where there's a reproduction of the same characteristics at different levels of the organization. I'm wondering when we think that way, and you talk about the sorts of things that Rachel and Jochen and Simone and Emanuele have talked about, what alignment means. Is alignment the same term we knew for so long, or is your concept of alignment, a well-aligned organization, changing? And I'm going to start off with Jochen, because I think that you might have seen that in with the business units that you have, the micro enterprises, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, this alignment and autonomy, I think if I would ask, and we are a group of around 100 people now in the call, right? If we would go out in a quiet mode what is alignment, we would probably get 115 different definitions, because at the end it's one word or two words, and it's also lived by the values that you're trying to implement, right? So we should not always think in black or white, alignment versus autonomy. I think with the right mindset, I think there's no contradiction whatsoever. I think what you see and what we are facing also is that when you create cross-functional business teams with end-to-end responsibility, to giving autonomy, end-to-end responsibilities. I mean, all these in a certain way, not buzzwords, but really stressing the autonomy of this group. Then you have different kind of people involved in these teams. And one people would say, well, I'm not autonomous. Nobody can tell me what to do. And the other would say, I'm humble enough to say, yes, I'm autonomous, but of course I need help from certain people and other departments, because that's what I'm struggling sometimes, that we're trying to find very easy answers for big questions. And I think this autonomy and alignment is one example of that. So it's not versus, for me, is finding right balance. And this alignment is really, if you create an eye-on-eye level contact between different people and not saying I'm superior than you are, then this alignment is much easier, right? If alignment is about I tell you what to do, then some people say that would be autonomy, because I tell you what to do, I'm autonomous. But I think it's more about talking on eye level with each other.
Okay, Rachel, your ideas on alignment?
I was going to say something fairly similar, but I think it really comes down to how you define alignment. I think that the most important alignment is basically with the direction of the organization. So if all teams are, for example, required to articulate what their product vision is, who their customer is, and the value that they deliver, that's alignment right there. Requiring all teams to do that one, maybe simple, maybe not so simple thing, that creates some alignment, related to making the implicit explicit and making sure everybody knows, what do we have here and what are we doing and why are we doing it? I would also include purpose. Purpose is something that I definitely use with my organization, the organizations I work with, because it helps really make it clear why teams exist, why companies exist. That's at least, my thought is, in a more traditional organization, teams and functions exist just because they always have. And I would say, well, do they still need to exist based on what the strategy of the organization is? So there's things you need to align on, and not everything do you need to align on.
Okay, great. Let me go back to Jochen for a second. Jochen, there was a flurry of comments and questions at the very beginning of the session this morning about Agile and about the role that Agile plays in all of this. And I know that at one point, I don't know if it's Agile was very much part of the title of the transformation that you were going through. Could you share some insights? And then I'm going to go back to Rachel for her ideas about this, and then see what Simone and Emanuele think.
Thanks for bringing it up, Bill. Actually, that was a talk in one of the breakout sessions where I was happy to join. At the end of the day, I think when you speak about agile or not agile, or different models or this model, I think it comes also down, when you say agile, for one person, it means Scrum and Post-its and people working in nice fancy offices. And for other people, it means more working on those principles and values, which can be agile, but are exclusive to agile. I mean, empowering people, autonomy, respect for each other, value, iterative approach. It's not brand new, right? I mean, one of the best examples I always have when it's just as a side story, it's a very small craftsman working in my village here, and he did the whole refurbishment of our family bathroom. And this person, if I would tell him you're so agile, he would say you're crazy. I don't even know what it is. But he incorporated all this visionary leader thing, involving the teams, making them responsible for decisions on how to do things, but being there as a coach and as a backbone if things go down south, right? So for me, we need to move away from thinking in, is it agile or not, but really thinking, do we touch values, beliefs? How do we treat people? How do we interact with people? And then you see a lot of similarities between all these different models that are out there. And I think That's why I'm very happy that our transformation is called Agile. Would we frame it, give it the same name today? I mean, we started 5 years ago. I'm not sure, but I think we would find a term that's trying to incorporate a lot of the things that we want to accomplish that I tried to highlight now. Great,
thank you. That was great. Rachel?
I would just say plus 1,000 to everything Jochen just said, but I think, you know, one of the conversations that comes up a lot is agile, capital A, agile, lowercase a. Like, what are you talking about? You have to start with understanding what you're referencing. But I think overall, you know, that's what we're trying to create is at the very least, lowercase a agile organizations that are much more responsive. And the simple way of saying it is, you know, understanding that you don't know everything to begin with. And if everybody's aligned on that, then, you know, that's what transformation's about.
Great, thank you. Emanuele, Simone, any thoughts on this?
I'm a bit worried about this conversation, to be sincere, because again, why are we doing this? Are we doing this to help teams work better? Well, okay, agile may be a solution. Are we doing this because we want to massively empower our colleagues, whether they're owners or not, to come up with new businesses, to go in totally different directions? That's a different thing. Are we trying to rethink ownership, going towards equity, sharing? I think there are so many ramifications that labels are a bit dangerous. I would really start with what you want to achieve in your context, and then experimenting with that, keeping in mind all the interconnections at the psychological level, conversation about psychological safety in the chat, the mindset of people, but also how to make it scale beyond teams. My risk with Agile, the fear I have with Agile, is that it often stops at the team level. Of course, it's not the intended objective, but still, this is what I see. I see hundreds of people saying, I'm spending my life in Agile rooms all the day, meetings. I don't know why. I don't even know why. So think about why, take inspiration from other organizations, but then Agile could be one of the inputs. I don't believe Agile right now, most implementations really addresses all the needs that we are discussing this morning.
What about values? There's a lot of comments going on in the question about values. We haven't spoken about those.
Please, Rachel, tell us about the 10 core values, because at the end, I think, sorry, I will be brief. When I said enabling constraints, it's not really the wall. It could be apparently soft things, but extremely powerful things. Purpose is one. The basic rules for self-management and self-organization is a bit stronger approach. Core values, and maybe Rachel will tell us a bit, are so powerful, so concrete, and not a way to tell people what to do, a way to inspire them to do the right thing. It's totally different.
Okay. Simone, any thoughts?
I mean, I think I have a slightly different view from many of the people here and in the chat. And I want to recall something that Dave Snowden told me on a conversation when he said, once you define your purpose, you condemn yourself and becoming purposeless. So I think that something that we need to understand, that markets are really challenging the idea of accepting bureaucracy. We are seeing a plummeting of transaction costs that is really clear, and many companies are losing market share for D2C competitors that typically do not stand the same bureaucratic processes that we are used to face in large organizations. Of course, we need to be aware that not everything that our organizations produce needs to, let's say, work the same way. So, for example, a commodity work will work much differently from innovative value and innovative services. But overall, the question is, we need to understand that to be on these markets, our organizations can stand, I would say, ever less technical and organizational depth.
And these ways of organizing in a very unbundled and very, I would say, complexity-driven ways of organizing, they really needed. They really serve the purpose of reducing organizational debt, reducing the difference between what is happening inside your organization and what is happening outside your organization. The point here is understanding that outside and inside, it's ever more and every day more a social construct. What we are seeing increasingly is an economy of connecting and leveraging pieces, an economy of standardized interfaces, dynamic connections, transient organizing. This is what we are seeing. The question is, how do we transform the behemoths we work in to really have a chance to stand what is happening on the market? And I think this is really something we need to keep in mind beyond purpose and beyond, let's say, the aims that we have as an organization. Increasingly, I think we are less entitled to say, we do this, we are that. We need to be much more into, as I said, creative entropy, accepting that our organization are in continuous flux and new things can emerge all the time. And we are not what our industry is. Our organizations are really vehicles for major innovations that can happen only if we really make them flow friendly.
So Simone, you and Emanuele work with a lot of different organizations. Are you optimistic about the momentum that you see around transformation, or do you see it, not being able to fulfill the vision that you believe it has?
I think I'm really faithful, because what I see, these changes normally happen very slowly up until a certain moment where they start to happen very fast. And this is where we are now. I think we are at this inflection point between before and after, where before, how my friend and our shared friend, Lisa Gensky Bill, says often, between the no more and the not yet. So I think now it's up to you to understand, do you want to be part of the not yet, or do you want to stay and defend the no more in your organization? And I think we really need to encourage this. Of course, challenges are not just market challenges. What we are seeing are profound complexity related challenges in environment, social, politics, instabilities, risk, landscape changing. So the changes that I think our organizations will go through are even deeper than what we can imagine now. And I'm thinking, for example, how organizations can reconstruct their connections with landscapes, with communities, and re-embed their business models. This is probably something that comes faster than we can imagine. And I think we really need to be open-hearted towards really questioning everything we do in our organizations at the moment. As we see the inflection point, like, I'm not the only one saying that. For example, I can quote Rita McGrath and her latest book. It's really about understanding we leave this inflection point, and therefore we really need to question what we used to do and look into what we can do differently.
Do you think the pandemic was an accelerator of this, or has it been a confuser? I mean, what is that role been?
I mean, the pandemic is certainly an accelerator, as it's pushing everyone, and especially consumers and customers, 10 years forward. So it's changing the way we interact with services and organizations much faster than our organizations can change. This is why, for example, the pandemic has pushed some businesses to the top that they were struggling. And you think about all these e-commerce solutions, for example. And so I think we really need to look into the pandemic as a both fast forward, and on the other hand, an harbinger or things to come. For example, asymmetric risks. Pandemic is clearly an asymmetric risk, something that brings, I would say, unpredictability to the foreground. Now we know that we live in unpredictable times. The pandemic was just a message, but a message from a future that is going to be heavily unpredictable. So how do you respond to this unpredictability with the sclerotic organizations we used to live in? We can't do that. So I think we really need to understand that we have been talking about the VUCA for ages. Now it's time to really start to rethink our organizations for this. It's not just about a PowerPoint presentation anymore.
Yeah. Incidentally, Joseph Huckner from Fujitsu just said, I don't believe there's ever been a greater chance for not yet in history than it is today. And I think that's
and Fujitsu is doing it. So Fujitsu is another story that we interviewed and is coming up. At the end, wherever you look, big organizations, small organization, any industry, any culture, this is happening. This is happening because of human needs, what Simone was discussing, and because of business needs. And the speed, well, it's your call. So at the end, I think we are here because we want to nudge you a bit in doing your own part, not to copying, but doing your own part. And Bill, I see an acceleration. Maybe it's not accelerated enough, but it's happening, and we are seeing it in regulated industries, even the most complicated places in which you would expect no progress in giving space, giving room to people. This is happening. It's happening in a matter of months. Some of the micro enterprises in hire became unicorns in a matter of months. So the speed is dramatically becoming exponential. And maybe today you are a leader. This is the case for many of our clients, but maybe in 6 months, you no longer are a leader. So unless you start doing it today, well, probably you are too slow to really achieve momentum with this transformation. So I think pandemics is the time. Now is the time, and you don't have to do it all. You got to get started today.
Yes, yes. And I see Yanka's just on the chat talked about relevance. And I think this is very much about relevance. Rachel, optimistic or not?
Wow, I was going to touch on the fact that, the pandemic is actually what caused me to do the work that I do outside of an organization, because you no longer had to convince anybody that they needed to do something different, that they weren't kind of set up in terms of the way they are organized and also the way they get work done to be responsive to the market conditions. So I know this started as a values conversation, but it's kind of steered this way. And just to come back to the values real quickly, since Emanuele mentioned it, just related to the Zappos core values, there was a comment in chat. You don't just determine what your values are at the beginning necessarily. They, show themselves to the organization over time. And that's exactly what happened at Zappos, for example, in that it was a survey sent out to everybody in the organization. What are the values? What are you seeing around you? How are people interacting and treating one another? And there was like, a 6 or 9 month process of actually extracting what the culture and core values look like that are boiled down to now 10 core values, with the first one being deliver wow through service, which is the foundation for the market-based dynamics initiative, is delivering service. Zappos, you may know them as selling shoes, but they also sell clothing and other things. They also run a theater on the Strip in Las Vegas, and there's a lot of examples of how Zappos, the foundation is to deliver well through service, but it doesn't mean just being an e-commerce business anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I actually think that you've in the success of Zappos, you've changed the way that many industries work. We now have much different expectations of the way in which products are tried, shopping at home works. I think you've had a huge impact. Thank you, Jochen. Optimism.
I think I agree to most of what has been said. I just want to add a different spin to the thinking. I think COVID is an accelerator for many things, technology, for different consumer behaviors, for different things. But I think we should also not be mistaken, at least from my perspective, and that's probably not only business-wise, that everything gets just better because we're moving into the future. I think you also see in COVID that it's more about a black or white discussion. It's more about the values this or values that, and I think having now so many people, for example, in this call, and if you find ideas of what we all have in commonly shared, that people should be given more autonomy, that we should have more focus on teams, on collaboration, on solving our big challenges in the world. I think we need more and more people to stand up for those things and really work on those things, because I strongly believe it's not a natural evolvement into this. We think about sustainability, we think about more people caring. This is not a one-way street. This is only a one-way street if we find enough people to go the same direction. So it's all up to us, because at the end, I think organization, nations, politics, it's all about the people. These are all things that we develop in our mind, but at the end, it's about the Bill, the Simone, the Emanuele of these worlds. And if they also stand up for their ideas and their values, if we make something really positive out of that. So it's not a natural evolvement from my perspective that go always one way in a positive way, what we think is positive, but we really need to stand up for it and also put our effort and contribution into it, and find other people who support the same ideas.
So there was a very early conversation on the chat about how difficult the role of national cultures, and Germany was particularly singled out as being a difficult place to do this. But you're doing it in Germany.
I think it's the cultural aspects you always need to take into consideration, right? So you need to also have where you're coming from. Are you a small company that's starting to scale? Are you a big company that's trying to find new business fields? So there's not one size fits all. I think that's the main message you should take out of the session from my perspective. Now, being a German, a South German, I can speak about Germans in length, and I have my problems with my nation sometimes. But I think, again, it's when you look at the values that Germany has in terms of trying to think socially with each other, caring about each other, trying to find, yes, consensus, but also having many interesting companies that are founded here, like Bosch 135 years ago. I think it's this paradox that we need to live in, right? I think paradox of taking ownership but caring for each other. I think there's also a huge potential for countries like Germany that seem to be quite conservative or traditionally focused compared to other companies. But I think there's also a big chance or opportunity in this aspect.
Yeah. What's fascinating to me is that a few minutes ago we talked about the role of senior management and senior management consciousness, and I think we're all aware how difficult that is. But it just doesn't end there. We have to really build that consciousness throughout the entire community. We're trying to change, and I think it's different in different places, but certainly societies where people take care of one another.
Yeah, and that's totally Bill. That's what I totally want to emphasize. Because it's always connection about, yes, the leadership, and is your leadership behind? I think it's also a bit, you need to take everybody, we need to empower, or not empower is the wrong word, enable and encourage everyone in the organization to take ownership of his own area of where he can change things. And then that's also a big important thing.
Well said. We have about 6 or 7 minutes to go. I'd like to ask each of the panelists, what's the most important thing they could pass on to the rest of us? What have you learned as a result of your experience that you think is worth sharing? I'll start with Rachel, if you don't mind.
There's no one right way. I think a lot of people think that if they do it the way that some other organization is doing it, whatever it might be, that's going to work for them, and that's not necessarily the case. And finding the opportunities within the organization to inspire and create change is the most important thing. And getting the right people in the room, so to speak, to figure out where the best starting place is. Taking organizations through a learning journey of exposing them to new methods and ways of organizing and getting work done usually leads them to this place where it's like, okay, now it makes a lot more sense what tools, what building blocks to use. But don't assume that whatever is out there is always going to work for you.
Okay, great, thank you. Emanuele?
I will go with two points. The first one is that agile, but many other transformations we've been hearing about are focusing on fragmenting the firm in many small teams. That's a great starting point. You can call it squads, circles, pods, whatever you want, but that's just the beginning. When it gets complex and powerful is when you rethink the way for people to dynamically come together. This is something that only a few organizations in the world are doing without using hierarchy. So this is, to me, the inflection point. How you can empower people, not just to do their own thing, but to collaborate without imposing collaboration from the top, without designing statically the organization. And this brings me to the second point. I think the fil rouge in whatever we have been saying today is that in this world, at this level of uncertainty and unpredictability, we need adaptive organizations. In other words, we need to empower the organization to change the organization, not managers, not leaders, not even consultants, but to infuse the mechanism for evolution, not transformation. There is no point A, no point B. It's a constant process to attribute this process to the organization. If you do that, the starting point doesn't matter because it's an ongoing journey of sensing and reacting. This is what IR has been doing, what Zappos has been doing, many other organizations have been doing. And this is so far from whatever we have been preaching in, MBAs, business schools, and in real organizations for 100 years. Get started with that.
If I could jump in myself with the work that I've been doing with Hire, the thing that always amazes me with Rendanheyi is not the fascination with structure. That's what everybody is fascinated with, but the details, the mechanics, all those things that make this work so that workers are not insecure when they're asked to take these chances, so that they know how things work. And I think continuity plays very well into that because everyone knows how this works, and that's a huge strength. Jochen, would you share a learning with us?
The learning is, I think, looking at the diverse group that is here in the team, the different companies and people that I'm trying to connect to get fresh ideas is showing, I think, for me that it's not about can this company do it or that industry do it. It's about you see small and big companies, you see companies from consumer goods, from IT, from banking. Try to connect, not within your company only, try to connect with this growing niche, I would call it, who thinks that we should reconsider how we do business or how do we work together and collaborate together in a whole new way. I think there's a growing thing, and I think that's a big chance to also think holistically different on how we run businesses. And I think I've just want to encourage everybody to step up, be bold, try to find people that want to join you, and do 2 steps before you ask to be allowed to do 1 step. I mean, we also train our people to, can I do that? Can I do that? Do it. And then let's see if people even recognize it.
Great, good, thank you. Simone?
I mean, I spoke already too much, so I just want to say, again, look at what's happening outside of your organization to see how your organization should transform. That's where you want to be. That's where, that's where you want to optimize for. And that's it. That's my final reflection. And I think Hire has been doing this eminently with their new coming ideas like EMCs and platforms and ecosystems thinking. So really, that's a great inspiration for everybody.
Good, thank you. So let me just pull everything together by saying that the purpose of today's session was to both talk about the transformation process at Hire, Rendanheyi, but also look at other organizations who are doing things that are similar, but not exactly the same. And I think we were so fortunate to have Rachel and Jochen with us because they gave us a much broader and much more diverse view of how organizations can empower release the latent talent that exists within the organization and fulfill people much more effectively than other ways of organizing do. I was impressed by the chat. As always, the chat was so interesting. I hope we have access to this after the meeting, because I think it's well worth reading through. And I want to thank particularly not only Jochen and Rachel for a great appearance, but I want to thank Emanuele and Simone for getting me out of Zoom hell and back into the session. It was a privilege to be with you all. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Christine at this point, I think. Is that the way it works, Christine?
It's wonderful. Thank you, Bill, for wrapping this up. And I want to say thank you to everyone who joined this session. And as Bill just mentioned, the chat was amazing. Thank you for always being so engaged and discussing with each other. That's what really makes this community come alive. Thank you, Bill, for guiding us through this session. And thank you to all the speakers. Also for the ones who got up late at night or stayed up late. Thank you so much for your contributions to this. I think what we learned today is to be bold. So I hope that's a takeaway for you. And how better to learn this than at our next workshop that's coming up about leadership strengths and how to leverage them, a workshop by Gallup. So we hope you join us again for the next workshop. You will find the link in the chat below. Thank you so much for joining, and see you at the next session. Thank you. Feel free to unmute and say bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.